My mentor stole my idea, then I became his biggest competitor. Hi, my name is Loralei. I'm 31 years old, and I'm the founder and CEO of a tech startup that just closed a $4.2 million series of funding round. My face was on the cover of a regional business magazine last spring. I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech conference in Austin, and I stood on that stage in a red blazer with my hands shaking only a little, and I thought about how 3 years ago, a man I trusted completely took everything I had built and slapped his own name on it. This is the story of how Dr. Richard Callahan, my mentor, my advisor, the man who called himself my biggest champion, stole the idea I had spent 2 years of my life developing. And this is the story of how I didn't just survive it. I destroyed him at his own game. They say betrayal is only possible when trust exists first. I learned that the hard way. But what nobody tells you is that betrayal, as devastating as it is, can also become the most powerful fuel you will ever find. I need to take you back to the beginning because you can't understand how far I fell without knowing where I started. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, the daughter of a nurse and a mechanic. My parents were good, hardworking people, but money was always tight, and college was something I had to earn every single dollar of on my own. I got a partial scholarship to study computer science, worked 2 part-time jobs, and graduated with honors. I wasn't the most naturally gifted coder in my class. Some of those kids had been programming since they were 11, but I was the most relentless. I stayed late. I asked questions. I filled notebooks with ideas. After graduation, I landed a junior position at a mid-sized software company in Nashville, and for 3 years I kept my head down, learned everything I could, and quietly built something on the side. An idea that had been living rent-free in my brain since my junior year of college. The idea was a platform. I'll describe it in general terms because I'm still protective of the details, designed to help small healthcare providers manage patient communication and appointment coordination through a single AI-assisted interface. It wasn't just another scheduling app. It was something that genuinely understood the specific workflow pressures of small clinics, the way a receptionist at a 3-doctor practice thinks, the patterns of cancellations and follow-ups, and insurance headaches. I had talked to over 60 clinic staff members over 2 years to build this. I had notebooks full of their words. I had wireframes, user personas, a financial model, and a working prototype I'd coded myself on weekends. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine and it was real. That's when I found Richard Callahan. Or rather, he found me. Dr. Richard Callahan was something of a legend in Nashville's startup ecosystem. He'd founded 2 companies, one of which had been acquired for a significant sum in the early 2010s. He ran a mentorship program affiliated with Vanderbilt's business school, and he had a column in a local business journal. He was 54, silver-haired, well-dressed, and he had a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in any room. I was introduced to him at a startup mixer in the spring, about 3 years ago. I was nervous. I had my little pitch rehearsed, and when he asked me what I was working on, I gave it to him, the condensed version, the elevator pitch I had polished 100 times in my bathroom mirror. He listened with his full body, the way some people do, leaning forward, nodding slowly, eyes sharp and focused. Loralei, he said, and the way he said my name made me feel like I was being taken seriously for the first time in my professional life. That is a genuinely interesting problem space. Have you thought about the long-term data aggregation play? The analytics angle could be enormous. I had thought about it a great deal. And the fact that he immediately identified the same future potential I had been quietly excited about, it felt like recognition. Like finding someone who spoke the same language. He offered to be my mentor. Formally, through his program. We would meet twice a month. He would review my materials, make introductions, and help me prepare for fundraising. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Looking back, I should have noticed the way his eyes moved to my notebook when he thought I wasn't watching. I should have noticed how, after our second meeting, he started asking me to send him my documentation so he could review it beforehand. I should have noticed that his questions shifted over time from the big strategic picture to the very specific, the user research methodology, the technical architecture, the exact language I used in user interviews. He said he was helping me sharpen my pitch. He said investors would want those details. I gave him everything. Every deck. Every research summary, the full financial model, the technical documentation, the prototype login credentials because he said he wanted to experience it as a user would. I gave him all of it because I trusted him, because he was Dr. Richard Callahan, because I was Loralei from Knoxville who worked 2 jobs to get through college and had never had anyone powerful in her corner before. That trust cost me 11 months. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was scrolling through LinkedIn during my lunch break, something I do too often and always regret, when I saw a post from a venture capital firm I recognized. They had just announced a seed investment in a new healthcare communication platform. The description in the announcement was so familiar it made my vision blur. I read it 3 times. AI-assisted patient communication and workflow coordination for small and independent healthcare providers, designed to address the specific operational pain points of practices with fewer than 10 staff members. The company was called ClearPath Health Solutions. The founder and CEO was listed as Dr. Richard Callahan. I sat very still for a very long time. Then I went to the ClearPath website, which had gone live apparently that same week. And I read through the product description, the mission statement, the About section, and the features overview. And I felt something leave my body, some warm, essential thing, because it was my idea. Not a similar idea. Not an idea that had developed in parallel. It was my research, my framework, my vocabulary translated into slightly different sentences and stamped with his name and his face and his 2 prior exits and his Vanderbilt affiliation. I called my friend Bethany, who worked in tech law, and I said, "I need to talk to you. Tonight. Please." Bethany listened to the whole story without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I love her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Loralei, tell me you have documentation. Tell me you have timestamps." I did have documentation. I had 2 years of it. Dated notebooks, dated files, dated emails to myself where I had described my progress. I had the email chain with Richard where I had sent him the materials, which meant I had proof of when I sent them, and proof that he had received them before his company launched. "Okay," Bethany said. "Okay. Don't reach out to him. Don't post anything. Don't tell anyone except me and a lawyer. Can you do that?" I said I could. My hands were shaking so hard I had to put my phone down on the table. But I didn't cry that night. I was too angry to cry. I want to describe the weeks that followed honestly because I don't want to make myself sound stronger than I was. I was a mess. I went to work every day and functioned, more or less, because I didn't have any other option. But at night, I would sit with my laptop and go through my documentation and feel this sickening oscillation between fury and despair. I kept thinking about every meeting with Richard, replaying conversations, looking for the moment I should have seen it. I thought about all the times he had praised my thoroughness, complimented my research methodology, said things like, "The way you've framed this is really sophisticated, Loralei." He was cataloging me. He was evaluating the asset. He called me twice during those weeks. I let both calls go to voicemail. In the first one, he said he'd been busy and hoped we could reconnect soon. In the second one, he mentioned, almost casually, that he had started a new venture and would love to loop me in sometime. Loop me in. Into my own idea. Bethany connected me with a tech attorney named Marcus Webb, who was methodical and calm and did not sugarcoat anything. He reviewed my documentation and said I had a reasonable case for misappropriation of trade secrets and potentially breach of the implicit confidentiality of a mentorship relationship. He was careful with his language, the way lawyers are. He said, "This is a strong factual record. The challenge is resources and timeline. Litigation is expensive and slow. I want you to understand the full picture before you decide how to proceed." I understood the full picture. Richard had funding, a network, and a head start. I had timestamps and a righteous fury, and not much else. But Marcus also said something that changed the direction of everything. He said, "The most powerful thing you can do right now, parallel to any legal action, is build your own company and get to market. If you can demonstrate that you are the originator and the better executor, that changes the entire narrative, legally and commercially." I drove home that night with the windows down in November, which was freezing, and I thought about that word. Execute. I could execute. That was the one thing nobody could take from me. I gave my notice at my job 3 weeks later. I moved back in with my parents in Knoxville for 6 months to cut my expenses to almost nothing. My mother cried when I arrived with my car packed full of boxes, and not because she was unhappy to see me. She cried because she was worried, and because she could see in my face that something serious had happened. I told her a version of the truth. That someone had stolen credit for my work, and I was going to fix it. My father, who is a man of very few words, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." That's a compliment. I worked 16 hours a day for those 6 months. I rebuilt the prototype from scratch, not because I had to, but because I wanted the new version to be so demonstrably better than what Richard had launched that there would be no question about the lineage of the ideas. I incorporated everything I'd learned. I reached out to the clinic staff I had originally interviewed and asked if they would participate in a beta program. 41 of them said yes. 41 real users who had participated in my original research, who remembered talking to me, whose voices were in my notebooks. I also, quietly and carefully, began documenting Richard's product against my original materials. Every feature he had launched that corresponded to something specific in my documentation. Marcus was building the legal case in the background, patiently and methodically. We were not rushing. We were building something airtight. Meanwhile, I was watching Richard's company. ClearPath was getting press. He was doing interviews. He was presenting at conferences I had dreamed of attending. He was speaking in my language, using frameworks I had developed, and every time I saw his name in a headline I channeled that feeling, that cold, nauseating fury directly into my work. In month 4, I applied for a grant through a Women in Tech entrepreneurship program. I won it. $12,000, not a fortune, but enough to keep building. I used my own documentation, my user research, my original concept materials, as part of the application. Those materials were now part of a legal record. In month 5, I was introduced through a friend of a friend to a woman named Diane, a former healthcare executive who had been looking to angel invest in something in the health tech space. We had coffee. I showed her the prototype. I walked her through the user research. I was, by that point, so deeply knowledgeable about the problem I was solving that I could answer any question she threw at me with specific, grounded detail. Because I had done the work. Because this was mine. Diane wrote me a check for $75,000. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that coffee shop and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of crying. Then I drove back to my parents' house and got back to work. I officially launched my company, Helio Health, 8 months after I discovered what Richard had done. I named it Helio because of the sun, because I had spent so long feeling like something was growing underground, in the dark, and I was ready for it to come into the light. The launch was quiet. A press release, a LinkedIn post, a small feature in a local tech newsletter. I was not trying to make noise yet. I was getting my first real clients on board, making sure the product worked exactly the way it was supposed to, building the foundation carefully. 41 beta users became 63 paying customers in the first 90 days. Richard noticed. I know he noticed because 2 weeks after my launch, I received a LinkedIn message from him. It was friendly, collegial even. Loralei. Saw the Helio launch, congratulations. Would love to grab coffee sometime and catch up. The healthcare communication space is exciting. I read it and felt something very specific. Not rage anymore. Something quieter and more dangerous than rage. Clarity. I showed the message to Marcus. He said, "Don't respond." Not yet. So, I didn't. 3 weeks later, Marcus filed. The lawsuit named Richard Callahan and ClearPath Health Solutions as defendants in a claim of trade secret misappropriation and breach of fiduciary duty arising from the mentorship relationship. The complaint was detailed, specific, and supported by a substantial documentary record, my dated research files, my prototype development logs, the emails in which I had sent Richard my materials, and this was the piece that Marcus considered the strongest element, testimony from 4 of my original research participants who confirmed that they had spoken with me, specifically, and described conversations that were directly reflected in ClearPath's product documentation. I also filed a complaint with the mentorship program's affiliated institution. That process was slower and more bureaucratic, but it mattered. It put his name in a formal review process. The morning the complaint was filed, I posted on LinkedIn. Not about the lawsuit. My attorney had advised me to keep that professional and let the legal process speak. I posted about Helio, about the 2 years of user research, about the 63 clinics, about what we were building and why. I posted one specific line at the end. Every feature of this platform comes directly from conversations with the people who use it. That research is our foundation, and it belongs to no one else. I did not tag Richard. I didn't need to. The post got significant traction in the healthcare tech community. Several people who knew Richard tagged themselves in comments, and a few colleagues of his, people who had seen him present ClearPath, sent me direct messages asking questions. I answered every single one of them, calmly and factually. The confrontation happened not in a dramatic boardroom or a shouting match in a parking lot. It happened in a mediator's office, 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, because ClearPath's lawyers had pushed for mediation before the case could proceed to full litigation. I walked in with Marcus on one side of me and Diane, who had by then become not just my investor but one of my most ferocious advocates, waiting in the lobby as moral support. I wore a navy blazer. I had not slept well the night before. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest. Richard was already seated when I entered. He was wearing a suit. He looked, I noticed, older than I remembered. Or perhaps I simply saw him differently now. He gave me a careful, neutral smile as I sat down across from him. The smile of a man who had calculated his options and was still confident in his position. The mediator went through the procedural language. Then Richard's attorney spoke, a lot of language about the independent development of ideas, the commonality of concepts in the healthcare tech space, the distinction between inspiration and misappropriation. I watched Richard while his attorney talked. I watched the way he kept his face composed. The practiced neutrality of someone who had been in rooms like this before, who had negotiated and maneuvered and come out ahead. I thought about how I had sat across a coffee table from him and shown him my notebooks and felt so grateful that he was paying attention. When it was my turn, Marcus walked through the documentation with the precision of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. The dated files, the emails, the user testimony, the feature-by-feature correspondence between my original materials and ClearPath's product. It was not emotional. It was methodical and devastating. Halfway through, I saw Richard's composure begin to crack. It was subtle, a small tightening around his eyes, a slight shift in his posture. His attorney was writing rapidly on a legal pad. Then Marcus showed the final exhibit, a series of emails from Richard to me, sent during our mentorship, in which he had specifically praised features of my prototype that later appeared, nearly verbatim in description, in ClearPath's pitch deck. Sent before ClearPath was incorporated. Sent before Richard had any documented development activity. Richard's attorney asked for a recess. In the hallway, Diane grabbed my arm and said quietly, "You've got him." When we reconvened, Richard spoke for the first time. He looked at me directly, and for a moment I recognized the version of him I had first met, the attentive, compelling presence that had made me feel seen. But there was something different underneath it now. Something that looked like, and I want to choose this word carefully, embarrassment. "Loralei," he said, "I want you to know that Richard." I kept my voice level. I had rehearsed this, not a speech, just the ability to stay calm. "I don't need an explanation. I have the documentation. The documentation explains everything." His mouth closed. "What I want," I said, "is outlined in the complaint. I want attribution. I want licensing fees on the features that are demonstrably derived from my research. And I want a public statement acknowledging the source of the foundational concept." He looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the legal pad. The silence stretched out across that conference table, and I did not fill it. I had learned, through 11 months of building something from nothing, that silence did not need to be filled. It could simply exist, and the person who was most uncomfortable in it would speak first. It wasn't me. The settlement was reached 6 weeks later. I'm not permitted to disclose the specific financial terms. What I can tell you is that it was meaningful and that it funded the next phase of Helio's development at a critical moment. There was no public statement. Richard's attorneys pushed back hard on that, and Marcus advised me it wasn't worth the fight to force it. But the complaint was part of the mentorship program's institutional review, and the outcome of that review resulted in Richard's removal from his advisory role. That, I think, was the consequence that landed heaviest. That program had been part of his identity for over a decade. ClearPath continued to operate for another 8 months before quietly folding. The funding had been seed stage, the product had not achieved the traction Richard had projected, and without the depth of user research underlying it, without the real understanding of the problem, it remained, as I had suspected it would, a surface-level solution that clinics tried and then abandoned. Helio, meanwhile, grew. Not explosively. I want to be honest with you about this, because the real story isn't a fantasy. It grew the way real companies grow, which is slowly and then faster, with setbacks and pivots and moments of genuine terror when a major client churned or a feature didn't land the way I expected. By the end of our first full year, we had 147 paying clients. By the end of our second year, we had broken even. And 14 months ago, we closed the Series A round I mentioned at the beginning of the story. I have 19 employees now. Several of them are women who reached out to me after I spoke publicly about what had happened, not the lawsuit, but the broader experience of having work minimized, overlooked, and taken. 3 of them are building things that I am doing everything in my power to protect and develop properly. When they show me their ideas, I take notes, and then I hand the notes back to them. I want to tell you where I am now, because this story deserves an honest ending, not a triumphant one. I still think about Richard sometimes. Not with the white-hot fury I carried through those early months that has cooled into something harder and quieter and more useful. I think about the version of myself who sat across from him at that first coffee meeting and felt so grateful to be noticed. I don't feel embarrassed by that version of me. She was doing the best she could with the information she had. She worked 2 jobs to get through college. She stayed late. She filled notebooks. She was right about the idea. She was right about the research. She was right about everything that mattered. What I learned, and I mean really learned in the way that changes how you move through the world, is that trust is not naivety. Trusting people is not the mistake I made. The mistake I made was confusing access with alliance, confusing interest with investment. Richard was interested in what I was building. That is not the same thing as being invested in me. I know the difference now. I carry that difference into every meeting, every introduction, every time someone says, "Loralei, tell me what you're working on." I tell them, but I tell them on my terms, with my documentation in order and my attorney's number in my phone. I tell them as someone who knows her own value, because she proved it. My father called me the month after the Series A closed. He's not a man who says much, as I told you, but he said, "I read about your company in the paper." I said, "Yeah, Dad. It's going okay." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Stubborn." Still a compliment. I laughed until I cried, standing in my own kitchen, in my own apartment, in a city I chose, building something that is entirely, irrevocably, completely mine. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of your own version of this story, if someone has taken credit for your work, minimized your contributions, used your trust against you, I want you to hear this clearly. Document everything. Know your own value. And understand that the most powerful revenge available to you is not a lawsuit, though sometimes a lawsuit is necessary too. The most powerful revenge is becoming undeniable. Become undeniable. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And I am so glad to still be standing here to tell it.